Welcome to the National Capital Planning Commission's January 8th, 2015 meeting. Thank you. As a reminder to everyone, today's meeting is live streamed on the NCPC website. We do have a quorum, and so with that, I'll officially call the meeting to order. We will proceed without objection to the open session agenda as has been publicly noticed. Item number one is the report of the chairman. And I'd like to take just a moment to note that there are some changes in the works. With this new year has come a change in the Congress, and a change in the mayor's office, and a change on D.C. City Council. In Congress, as we all know, Congressman Issa has served with distinction as chair of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, and he served with distinction and has taken great interest in his responsibilities on this commission. The new chairman of that committee, and thus our new House of Representatives member on NCPC, is Representative Jason Chaffetz of Utah. And we welcome him and look forward to working with him and his staff. And toward that end, I'm pleased to note that our longtime friend Howie Dennis, who is on the committee's professional staff, will continue to be with us and Representative Chaffetz designee. Along with Howie today, just by way of introduction, is Chris D'Angelo, who is, are you on the permanent staff as well? Yes. Yes, and so we look forward to working with you, and he will join us at the table today, though Mr. Dennis will be the voting member. In the Senate, the Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs has been chaired by Senator Carper, and we have certainly, of Delaware, we've certainly had a good working relationship with him and his staff. The committee chairman, the new committee chairman, will be Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. We look forward to working with Senator Johnson and his designees, who will be appointed in due course. In the mayor's office, of course, we have a new mayor in Mayor Bowser, and we very much look forward to working with her. She has been on D.C. City Council. She knows NCPC well. I want to take a moment to note that for the first time in probably 25 years or so, we do not have sitting with us Rob Miller as a representative of the district. Rob has served this commission diligently. He is always prepared, and as we know, he has always been a quite zealous advocate for the city's interests. Rob loves the District of Columbia. A friend who looked into Rob's service on this commission suggests that it appears that Rob has been appointed more times and by more officials than anyone in the history of NCPC. So a glance at the history book suggests that Rob was first appointed as one of the alternates from D.C. City Council, and he has been reappointed by numerous D.C. Council chairs. And then, of course, he has served as an appointment from Mayor Gray. And so I will personally miss Rob Miller, and I think I speak for us all that we will miss Rob Miller. We also have had a long relationship with Arrington Dixon, who has served for numerous mayors as their NCP representative. This goes almost 20 years. He is not with us today. Mr. Dixon is an institution here, and we know his devotion to his beloved Anacostia. So we look forward to working with the mayor and her new appointees, who will be appointed in due course. And we also will look forward to welcoming a new head of the D.C. Office of Planning, Eric Shaw. If tradition holds, the head of the D.C. Office of Planning will serve as the mayor's representative. Mr. Shaw arrives in his new post from Salt Lake City. But today we have sitting with us our longtime colleague, Jennifer Steingasser, who is a veteran of D.C. Office of Planning and has been with us for many years. The past year or so, we've had with us Ellen McCarthy, who was serving as the interim director of the Office of Planning. And in numerous capacities over the years, she has been a fixture in the D.C. planning community, and I'm sure we will continue crossing paths with Ms. McCarthy in one way or another. And then in terms of City Council, welcome. The City Council of the District of Columbia is off to a new start, and Chairman Mendelsohn will remain at the helm. We look forward to our very close continuing working relationship with you and your designees to the Commission. One of your principal designees in the past has been Tommy Wells. We miss his presence here today, but as he is the new D.C. Director of the Department of the Environment, I'm sure we will continue seeing him professionally, and we look forward to that. We also do not have with us Jessica Jacobs, who has frequently represented the D.C. Council Chairman on this commission. She has represented you and the district with great professionalism, and we wish her well as well. So that is the Chairman's report, just to welcome some new folks and to note the, not the passing, the departure of some of our longtime colleagues, and we look forward to new appointees who are coming. With that, any questions or comments? Agenda item number 2 is the report of the Executive Director, Mr. Acosta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Happy New Year's to you all. I just have one public announcement that I think the general public should be aware of. NCPC and the Smithsonian Institution are accepting public comments concerning the alternatives and scope of issues to address in the environmental assessment for the South Mall Campus Master Plan. Public comments will be accepted through January 30th. We anticipate also that the Smithsonian will make an informational presentation to the Commission on the South Campus Master Plan at your February meeting, so they'll be here to brief you on that. So we hope we receive a lot of comments from the public regarding this very important project near the National Mall.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Acosta? Agenda item number 3 is the legislative update. Ms. Schuyler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy New Year, members of the Commission. In the interest of time, I have placed before you at your seats a summary of the commemorative works-related legislation that was enacted by the 113th Congress. It is a total of 13 items, and I thought I would just enumerate 3, which we will probably be seeing sooner rather than later. The first is an amendment to the Commemorative Works Act, which will allow donor recognition for all commemorative works, subject to specified criteria and review and approval by the Secretary of the Department of Interior or the Administrator of the General Services, depending upon whose land the commemorative work is located. This also has implications for the policy, NCPC policy, on donor recognition for non-commemorative works, and I think we'll be seeing some staff work on that in the future. The second item is a bill commemorating the location of a memorial to commemorate the more than 5,000 slaves and freed black persons who fought for independence in the American Revolution. This approves a location within Area 1 for the National Mall Liberty Fund DC to construct this memorial. I think there's been some talk about a location, and again, I think that may be coming forward soon. Finally, the third I'd like to call to your attention is the authority to enhance the commemorative work, which is at Pershing Park, and to redesignate that as the official World War I memorial. As the centennial of World War I approaches, I think this will receive some attention and priority, and again, we can look forward to some actions on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Schuyler? We will now move to our action agenda. We're entering the new year with a we're lightly entering the new year. We have only 2 action items on our agenda today. The first is agenda item number 4A. It's an alley closing in squares 1412 and 1415E. We have Mr. Hinkle. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Commissioners. I'd like to begin with a little bit of background on this alley closing. The Commission's role in reviewing alley closings is advisory. That is in accordance with District Code. The Commission provides comments to the Office of the Mayor in terms of potential impacts to federal interests if the alley were to be closed. The Mayor then transmits NCPC's comments to the Council of the District, which makes the final determination on alley closings. And NCPC does review and comment on a number of alley closings throughout the year, but because most of these do not affect federal interest and do not generate public concern, NCPC typically comments through a delegated action by the Director. However, this proposed alley closing was brought to the full Commission due to the public's interest. But NCPC is not the only agency that submits comments. There are several district agencies that are also consulted on proposed alley closings. For example, the district's Office of Planning reviews alley closings for their impacts on the district's planning and design objectives as contained within the district elements of the comprehensive plan. And then relevant to this proposed alley closing, in September of 2013, the Office of Planning reported that it had no objections to the proposal. And then a little further history on NCPC's review of this alley closing. Typically, NCPC provides comments prior to action by the District Council. However, in this case, the Office of the Surveyor made an initial determination that the proposed alley closing met one of the exceptions within the district code that allowed the district to not refer the proposal to NCPC. However, late in the district's review process, when the bill to close the alley was initially before the council in early December, it was determined that the proposal should have been referred to NCPC for review. And as such, the proposal was submitted to NCPC on December 4th. Then on December 17th, the council subsequently took a vote to approve the alley closing. However, this vote is contingent on a favorable review by NCPC. So thus, if the commission today finds no adverse effect on federal interest from the proposal, then the alley will be closed. So now on to the proposal. The subject alley is unimproved as an alley, and it's located in the Palisades area of Northwest Washington, which is a neighborhood that roughly runs along the north side of the Potomac River, just north of Georgetown. And this is an aerial of the location of the proposed alley closing, which is a neighborhood of single-family homes situated between MacArthur Boulevard and Canal Road. The alley specifically runs between Chainbridge Road and a portion of the rights-of-way to a former trolley that ran between Georgetown and Glen Echo, which is just further up on the Potomac. This is another view. In this view, I've highlighted the trolley rights-of-way, which is a district property, and its relation to the alley. While there are no federal properties adjacent to the proposed alley closing, the trolley rights-of-way currently provides an informal trail between the residential neighborhoods in the area and the C&O Canal, as well as Battery Kimball Park, which are both national parks. And then the trolley rights-of-way also provides access to the Palisades Recreation Center, which is just off this aerial to the north. So this is a plat showing the subject alley and the adjacent lots. The alley is 15 feet wide and approximately 225 feet long. And it has about 2,500 square feet. While the alley has never been improved, it could provide access to 4 single-family homes. And as I mentioned before, there are no adjacent federal properties that would be impacted by the closure of the alley. Further access to the trolley rights-of-way will not be significantly impacted since, and as I'll show in the next couple of slides, one can easily access the trolley rights-of-way just a few hundred feet away on either Chainbridge Road or Sherrier Place. And then finally, in terms of the preservation of open space or green space, the alley today as a public rights-of-way could easily be paved over. The closing of the alley will, however, allow the property to be incorporated into the adjacent properties of single-family homes. And while the owners of these properties could do some things to reduce pervious surfaces or green space, they are still required to abide by regulations such as lot occupancy and setbacks that'll make it unlikely that this alley property will not remain open space. So there is a lot of history associated with this proposed alley closing. However, we do have a number of people here today that will testify on this project, and we'll get into that history. So in the interest of time, I'm going to let them explain it to you. But currently, the adjacent homeowner has incorporated the alley property into their yard. These pictures show at the top where the alley meets Chainbridge Road, and then on the bottom where the alley meets the trolley rights-of-way. And in 2009, the adjacent property owner fenced off the alley, but has subsequently removed the fence at Chainbridge Road. However, from my recent observation, there's still a fence where the alley meets the trolley rights of way. And this is just an aerial view showing where you can see actually the alley rights of way has been incorporated into the yard of the adjacent home. And this is just another aerial showing the same issue, if you can make that out.
So where's the fence?
The fence, there's a fence on the lower
Can't see it.
edge where there's a red arrow. And then there used to be a fence up on Chain Bridge Road, exactly where the other red arrow is. And that,
Can you go back to the last slide?
absolutely. So this has a different orientation. South is actually to the top of the slide. But the alley runs along the side of that one house. It meets Chainbridge Road where the lower red arrow is, and the trolley rights away on the upper arrow.
Can you show us with a pointer where the other Can you show us where the pointer where the other access points are? Or do they show up on this?
I'll show you in the next
Photo.
slide or so.
Okay, thanks.
I think this is what you were referring to. So this does show the additional access points to the trolley rights-of-way, both from Chain Bridge Road as well as the trolley rights-of-way. These access points are actually only a few hundred feet from where the alley meets Chain Bridge Road, as I indicated with the blue arrows. And then this is just a view of the trolley rights-of-way, about in the area where the alley meets it. And so I was just going to summarize on this slide. As I mentioned, there are no adjacent federal properties that would be impacted by the closure of the alley. Public access to the trolley rights-of-way will not be impaired by the closure as well. And incorporating the alley property into the adjacent yards will tend to result in the maintenance of the current green character of the alley. So it's with that the executive director recommends that the commission find that the proposed alley closing will not be inconsistent with a comprehensive plan for the national capital or other federal interests. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hinkle. Before we take this up as a commission, we do have a number of citizens who have signed up to speak in the public comment period, so we'll enter that now. We do have 5 citizens who have asked to speak. If you are representing an organization, you will have 5 minutes. If you are speaking for yourself, you'll have 3 minutes. And there's a clock on the wall opposite you, and you'll hear a slight chirp when it hits 0. The first person to speak is Ms. Alma Gates, representing Neighbors United Trust. Ms. Gates. Ms. Gates will be followed by Elizabeth Berry, and then Mr. John Wells. Ms. Gates, welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bryant and members of the Commission. I am Alma Gates. Action item number 7636 is in the Palisades neighborhood. I am here to ask members of the Commission to vote in opposition to the alley closing. The proposal should not receive favorable review by the National Capital Planning Commission, as it would set bad precedent and send the wrong message to others who may feel entitled to take similar actions to appropriate public space. Briefly, a homeowner decided his property would be enhanced by the addition of 3,500 square feet of adjacent green space. However, the green space in his sites was an unimproved public alley. Citing time as the issue, he knowingly added stone piers, underground sprinklers, garden lights, and a security fence to ensure the public would no longer have access to a walking path that leads to the old trolley trail above the Potomac Palisades. He got caught. At its final meeting of this session, the D.C. Council, without discussion, voted to deed over the land to the homeowner. Can NCPC members recall alley closings in residential neighborhoods in the city? My former ANC colleague and NCPC member Ann Hewer stated, in the past 20-some years, there has never been a residential alley closing in Ward 3. That despite our council members' claims that such actions are routine. Let me be clear. I am referring to open green space on the edge of the Potomac Palisades, not an alley in the downtown commercial area of Washington, D.C. This is a terrible precedent for the city. Public space is the most valuable asset the public owns. Over 40 residents and organizations oppose the alley closing, along with the Committee of 100 on the Federal City, the Palisades Citizens Association, and the ANC. But the D.C. Council ignored them. The handling of this issue has the very strong odor of something rotten. In July, the Ward Council member wrote to the Public Space Regulation Administration, I believe that it is highly unlikely that the Council will support this bill and adopt it prior to the end of Council Period 20 in December. The facts in this case did not change. However, the public watched as their council member did a complete about-face after the November elections and encouraged her colleagues to support the actions of a bad actor. That's Mary Chay's term for the homeowner. Is there a federal interest in this case? You bet there is. The corner of the alley intersects the old trolley right-of-way and NPS land known as the Palisades of the Potomac that is just above the C&O Canal, historic park. So why is this a big deal? Because the alley is public space and anyone living in Washington, D.C. knows public space is disappearing at alarming rates along with our tree canopy. This 3,500 square foot alley could end up being the only green space on the lower Chainbridge Road as more and more homes are shoved into tighter and tighter spaces, and giving this strip of land to the entitled homeowner would enable him to divide his lot in half in the future, although the immediate need is to enhance a swimming pool and side yard. No public benefit is gained by approving this alley closing. In closing, let me remind NCPC members that the comprehensive plan is specific in its directive about this area. It says, conserve the important scenic and visual resources of Rock Creek West, including the Potomac Palisades, which should be protected as a low-density wooded area above the Potomac River and C&O Canal, with future improvements along the river limited to passive open space, trails, and natural parkland. And the action item which follows, protect the historic linear open space that once supported the Palisades Glen Echo trolley line. We are here because the homeowner was caught and NCPC approval is a requirement for the alley closing. Knowing its actions were inconsistent with the directives of the comprehensive plan, the D.C. Council chose to ignore them. This taking of public space is a precedent that should not be dignified by NCPC. Please vote no on proposed action item 7636. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gates, very much. Ms. Berry? Elizabeth Berry? Mr. John Wells? Mr. Wells will be followed by Kate Montague Perry, and then Ms. Heather Keith. Mr. Wells, welcome.
Yes. Chairman Bryant and members of the commission. My name is John Wells, and I live with my wife Heidi Hartman at 5300 Cushing Place Northwest, about 1 block from the proposed alley closing. We frequently walk along the Glen Echo Trolley right-of-way. Access to the right-of-way is an important part of the recreational amenities of our neighborhood. The shortest route to the right-of-way for us is by way of the alley that the council's action proposes to close. Closing the alley thus restricts the recreational enjoyment of our neighborhood. The Commission is committed to advance the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan for the national capital. And among those goals and policies is the promotion of open space areas of particular interest and usefulness and maintaining public access to those areas. The trolley line right-of-way is one of those open spaces. It is therefore essential for the Commission to use its authority to maintain and improve open space areas like the trolley line right-of-way and to maintain public access to them. The comprehensive plan in Part 5 on parks and open space notes that dwindling resources often leave little money for the development and upkeep of federal and non-federal parks and open space. Because public funding is limited for land acquisition and maintenance, new sources for these essential activities need to be developed and novel solutions shaped. Moreover, the comprehensive plan also emphasizes the importance of trails like the trolley line right-of-way and notes that many trails do not meet current national trail standards. In addition, maintenance on some trail systems is inadequate. Existing trails should be better maintained and upgraded with recurring activities such as litter cleanup, sweeping, brush cutting, painting and minor bridge repair, and construction of support facilities such as benches, picnic tables, and kiosks. The trolley line right-of-way is a good example of this lack of resources. There is essentially no maintenance done on the right-of-way. As some witnesses have noted in their statements, the right-of-way is often muddy because of poor drainage, adversely affecting its value as open space. If public access to the right-of-way is to be restricted, the least that we should do is to try to compensate for this taking of public access by improving the quality of the right-of-way itself. This is an ideal opportunity for the new sources of funding and novel solutions cited in the comprehensive plan. The owner of the adjacent property is getting at least $200,000 worth of public land, and other estimates run considerably higher than that, for only $30,000. Even that modest $30,000 is not being programmed for improvements to the right-of-way or any other open space. This proposal could be much improved by requiring the adjacent landowner to pay closer to the fair value of the land and using that revenue to improve the quality of the right-of-way. I urge the Commission to use its authority to preserve and enhance open spaces, including trails and linear parks like the right-of-way. The Commission should send this proposal back to the D.C. Council and ask them to come up with a plan that provides benefits to the public in the form of improved quality of the right-of-way as a public space in exchange for the restriction in public access. This is an opportunity to develop a novel solution to the lack of funding for parks and open spaces, including a substantially increased penalty to the adjacent landowner for his illegal enclosure of the public alley, and the allocation of that increased penalty to the improvement of the trolley line right-of-way. In short, we need a new and better deal for the citizens of the National Capital Area who use these public spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Ms. Perry?
Good afternoon. My name is Kate Montague Perry. I also live in the Palisades. I'm here to urge your opposition to the proposed transfer of public green space to the private homeowner at 2427 Chainbridge Road Northwest. Several federal interests are at stake. First, the integrity of federal law and the Commission's own role. The D.C. Council's action of giving final approval to the alley transfer ignored your review and input required by federal law. The Council has made a joke of your important advisory role. Of what meaning is after-the-fact advice other than to serve as a rubber stamp? Second, the public green alley directly, physically accesses the Glen Echo Trolley right-of-way and National Park Service parkland, which is enjoyed by many for recreational use, relaxation, and visual relief. Your staff's recommendation is based on incorrect information. How can you explain ignoring National Park Service maps? Third, the integrity of DC's comprehensive plan, which explicitly directs preservation of federal parkland, DC's other green assets, and specifically the Potomac Palisades. This is a time of numerous and increasing pressures by competing interests to use, develop, or pave DC's green space. We are fortunate that most D.C. residents respect public space and do not simply seize it for their private use. Why sanction the council's giving away of even 3,500 square feet of green space, and especially to this homeowner with dirty hands who illegally fenced off the space into his yard and installed a parking area? The fence still exists, by the way, on both sides. And especially for the price of $30,000, which even D.C. assessed the property at more than $200,000, not to mention its unquantifiable environmental benefits. The Commission's favorable review of this giveaway would establish alarming precedent with dangerous implications D.C.-wide, essentially declaring an open season on our shared public green space, and people are watching. Opposition to the proposed giveaway is significant. As you've heard, the Palisades Citizens Association, the past and current ANC commissioners whose district the green space is in, and over 50 letters that we know of from Palisades residents. Given all of this, one must ask, why does this one homeowner's personal interest outweigh the federal interests I've described and those of the D.C. government, D.C. public? Why is D.C. doing this? In conclusion, I must thank Ward 2 Councilmember Jack Evans and former at-large member David Catania for their steadfast opposition to this giveaway sponsored by Ward 3 Councilmember Mary Che. Despite what the council reported to you, these two members voted against the giveaway on both December 2nd and 17th, 2014. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Keith. I'm sorry?
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Berry.
Oh, welcome. Yes.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Members of the Commission, my name is Elizabeth Berry. I am the founding director of the DC Department of the Environment, and I'm here today to ask that you vote to oppose the proposed alley closing as it impacts federal interests in the Potomac Palisades. Please ask the DC Council to reconsider its uninformed action in light of the following 3 reasons. First, the public space in question directly abuts National Park Service land. Second, the unambiguous mandates of the comprehensive plan were not considered. And finally, the council failed to seek NCPC review in advance as required by law. The alley closing application filed in mid-2013 required NCPC review before the council vote. The requirement is clear on its face, yet the council failed to submit this matter to you in a timely fashion. It had a year and a half to do so. Chairman Mendelson flatly refused to seek NCPC review before holding a council vote, despite a request to hold off until the legally mandated review. This irregularity is just one of many in what can only be described as a retroactive approval of a brazen land grab. The current council practice is that members defer to their ward colleague on matters within their ward. Here, the council's blind, uninformed approval led to a glaringly anti-democratic result. One council member, here Mary Che, alone determines the outcome. 2 council members bravely went against this custom, outgoing council member David Catania and Jack Evans, who chairs the Committee on Finance and Revenue. Evans told a reporter that he voted against the alley closing because it sets a negative precedent. Quote, "They took the alley, made it theirs. They ought to pay the value of the land, not just property taxes. In Ward 2, if you build an addition without permits, we make them take it down and then apply. That's the way it's supposed to work." A review of the council hearing on the issue shows strong neighborhood opposition and the repeated call to reopen this public right-of-way. In addition to dozens upon dozens of citizen letters, the Palisades Citizens Association voted twice to oppose the alley closing. The ANC previously had approved the Public Space Committee order to reopen the public space 10-0, and it did not approve the subsequent application to close the alley. The record before you may not be clear that this application is by a single individual who has told city officials that he knew the land was public but decided to annex it into his private property. He further has stated that he will pay the abutting neighbors for their share of the alley since there is about a 6-foot grade differential. The applicant has literally bought the abutting neighbors' approval as well as political influence through a well-connected lobbyist. The manner in which, can I finish?
Yes, please.
The manner in which the DC government systematically refused to enforce and ultimately vacated the order of the Public Space Committee a multi-agency body that required this alley to be reopened in November 2013, is a sad indication that pay-to-play politics still influence our elected officials. There can be no doubt that only one constituent was represented in this matter, while widespread neighborhood opposition was ignored. At the council hearing, Chairman Mendelson himself noted that the applicant's lobbyist was well worth the expense and later cited this discretionary expenditure as evidence that the bad actor who brazenly stole public open space was, quote, paid, has, quote, paid, thereby deterring others. Nothing could be further from the truth. The city has, on the contrary, spent hundreds of hours of staff time and countless taxpayer dollars to gift valuable and valued public space to one who illegally appropriated it. The NCPC is not influenced by council politics. The council will ultimately decide, but it should do so in a democratic fashion based on facts and merits. That has not happened here. I therefore ask you to vote against this proposed action and send it back to the council, asking that it reconsider the impact on the neighborhood and its network of green infrastructure, including the National Park Service land. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. And then last is Ms. Keith. Yep.
Hi, my name is Heather Keith, and I live on 48th Street, only a couple blocks away from the property that's been discussed. I did some reading of the history of the National Capital Planning Commission, as well as reviewing the comprehensive plan for the National Capital Region. I don't see how you could possibly approve the closing of the alley located off of Chainbridge Road. It is not consistent with the plan. It goes against everything that the NCPC stands for and advocates for in the comprehensive plan. It violates the Commission's stated mission to conserve and enhance the park and open space system of the National Capital Region, ensure that adequate resources are available for future generations, and promote an appropriate balance between open space resources and the built environment. This measure removes public open space and puts it into the hands of a private individual who violated the law by fencing in the land for his own personal enjoyment. The comprehensive plan Introduction to Parks and Open Space describes one of the defining characteristics of the region is the park and open space system. Your report emphasizes the benefits of open space as places for wildlife habitat, active recreational use, and visual corridors. If this document indeed reflects the mission of the NCPC, how can you approve the giveaway of 3,500 square feet of public land to a private individual? The space provides a visual corridor and unfettered access to the old trolley right-of-way and National Park Service-owned land called the Palisades of the Potomac, and supported a variety of wildlife. Actually, I take that back. It used to provide access to these lands until the cliques fenced in the public space and appropriated 3,500 square feet as their own personal property. The NCPC Comprehensive Plan also talks about the extensive trail system in the region and acknowledges a demand for more trails in all types as the urbanized area encroaches on existing trails. The report states some of these demands could be met by providing better connectivity between trail systems and more access points to existing trails. Turning over the paper alley does not meet this goal. As a matter of fact, it limits public access to the trolley right-of-way and the Palisades of the Potomac land. The NCPC Comprehensive Plan expansion and enhancement policies specifically state the federal government should acquire parks and open space as necessary to augment the open space system. It seems a better solution to the closing of the paper alley would be for the federal government to acquire the land so it may be accessed by the community and DC residents. According to the Land Trust Alliance fact sheet on economic benefits and open space protection, when land is protected, the adjacent land frequently increases in value, with homes selling for 10 to 20% more with access to a park. Why would the NCPC agree to increase the value of one person's land when leaving the 3,500 square feet as public space improves values for all the neighbors? I am compelled also to note the blatant error in the record. The DC Council did not vote unanimously for the paper alley. As a matter of fact, 2 council members voted against the measure, Jack Evans and David Catania. There are better solutions which have not been discussed or even considered, including the NPS acquiring the land. I ask the Commission to vote no on the proposed action and look for options for incorporating the 3,500 square feet into federal park land. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Keith. That ends the public comment period, and we will return the the matter to commission members. This is interesting. Questions or comments to this among commission members?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I feel it's necessary that as chairman of the council that I address the commission with regard to this. As Mr. Hinkle said in his presentation, the surveyor advised the council that NCPC review was not necessary at the time that we had the public hearing on this. And it wasn't until the day of the council's first vote that Mrs. Berry approached me. This was right before the vote to say that NCPC review was required. And subsequent to that, Jessica Jacobs, whom you know, was on my staff, checked with NCPC staff, and that's when we determined that, in fact, there was a mistake and that NCPC review was required. And so, as was noted, the action by the council was conditioned on the review today and how the commission here decides. The law with regard to street and alley closings is whether there's one standard for review, and that's whether the right-of-way is necessary for street or alley purposes. And it was our conclusion as a result of the hearing and my personally looking at the site and other inputs, such as from the Office of Planning, that the alley is not necessary for street or alley purposes. And that was the basis on which the council, through the committee of the whole, first in its recommendation, and then ultimately the council decided this. I think there is some misunderstanding on the part of some individuals with regard to what the law is involving rights of way. Most, if not all, rights of way in the District of Columbia, whether they are streets or alleys, are not held by the government in fee simple. We do not own the land. We have a right of way. And typically the right-of-way, and I believe it's the case here, the right-of-way came about from a property owner, I think it was a developer back 100 years ago, who in developing his or her property gave to the city a right-of-way, in this case a right-of-way for the alley. And the law is, and the practice has always been, that when a street or alley is closed, that the land then reverts to the abutting property owners, because that's from whence the land came. Sometimes the council will condition that the closing is otherwise, but that's typically the case, and that's the case here. So when individuals say that the city is giving to this property owner the city's land worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, no, the city is relinquishing the right-of-way and the land is reverting to the property owners. I have spoken personally with the 3 property owners abutting the alley who live on Sherrier Place. Other than the hearing, I don't recall that I've ever talked to the property owner who's the applicant in this case. The property owners on Sherrier Place, who in my view are in somewhat of an awkward situation because there's a wall, a retaining wall behind their property next to the alley, they all support this alley closing. And they've indicated to me, this is what they've said. I know there are folks in the community who think this may not ultimately be the case, and I don't know, that they intend, that they want the reversion of their half of the alley to them. And they support the alley closing. They realize they'll have to pay taxes on the land. When the legislation was initially proposed to the committee of the whole, there was in the initial recommendation that the applicant here, Mr. Click, would pay a value equal to what the property taxes would have been for the alley for the years that he had unilaterally taken the alley. I believe it was at markup at the committee of the whole, an amendment was made, so the applicant is going to be paying, I think it's 3 times that value. It's $30,000, and that's very unusual. But it's meant to serve as a penalty of sorts. I would make the argument that for those who feel that all of this has been wrong, and when I say all of this, I don't mean what the council is doing or what we're doing today, but rather that this individual unilaterally took this land. That's what he did do back in 2008 or 2009, and therefore we should not sanction the closing of the alley. I would argue that the owner is actually disadvantaged more by the closing of the alley. Not only is he paying the $30,000, but he's now going to be paying taxes on the land, his part, that reverts to him. And if the alley closing doesn't go forward, this alley is 15 feet wide. And because of that retaining wall, this alley is land that is really, I want to say, personal to the applicant's property. He's going to enjoy this alley whether it's closed or not. He may not be able to fence it off, but he's going to enjoy it whether it's closed or not. So to make him pay for it is actually more of a burden on him than if we don't close the alley and he gets to enjoy it. He doesn't pay the $30,000. He doesn't pay taxes. So that was what the thinking was behind the council's decision. As I said, the three property owners who will have to pay taxes, will get half of the land, live on Share Your Place. They support this. And we also did look to what the community sentiment was. And there's no question but that there was significant opposition from the community, but it was not unanimous. So I will be supporting the EDR.
So just to clarify, the alley property does not entirely go to the one who rather appropriated it, but perhaps up to the center line, even beyond the other
Correct.
property owners,
Typically
beyond their
what-
retaining wall up to the center line, they will get
Yes.
that portion.
Typically what happens is that a line is drawn down the center of the right-of-way, and then it reverts 50-50 to the owners on either side. And that's what will happen in this case.
Thank you. Other comments? Ms. White?
I would just ask Mr. Hinkle to put the slide back up that shows the alley. I really appreciate the background from Commissioner Mendelson and trying to understand this situation. But it seems that the law for the closings are based on street or alley purposes. But what's fundamental to the discussion is how this was used as a trail connection. And is there a slide where it shows the trail itself or the alley itself? Because it looks...
There we go. That's probably the best.
Can you go back to the one before? What was the one before? Is that it right there? That's not the connector.
trolley.
That's the trolley right-of-way that it connects to.
Correct.
Okay.
The yellow line is the trolley right away.
So we don't really have a slide of the actual alley to show how it's used. The reason I'm asking is typically with open space that's heavily used, and I understand it was unimproved, there's always a desire line and you can see where people walk. And so I guess if this had come to us in the proper order, one of the questions I would have asked is how is this used? And I respect that the staff here at NCPC is always very thoughtful and looks to do their analysis on whether there's a federal interest in a very careful way. But there's something about this that makes me look at this as I think the interpretation is a little bit too narrow and too specific, because this is a trail connection that appears from the testimony to be pretty heavily used by the neighborhood. I don't know for a fact. I haven't seen any data as to how this is used. So from a precedent-setting perspective, it troubles me that we're taking away something. I mean, put aside the background of how this happened or any personal benefit to the property owners, but I can imagine an adjacent property owner would never object to having control over open space. I mean, it's only a benefit to the private property owner. So while it has to remain open space, public access will be restricted to this alley, right?
Correct.
Okay. So to me, that's a fundamental problem. And the fact that, yeah, the fellow's paying a penalty, I appreciate the background on the value of the land. That's not the question for me, but there doesn't appear in any of the material that I read any plans to replace that land, whether it's as a trail connection or another open space in the neighborhood to even mitigate the impact of taking away the public land, right? Am I right in that, or did I miss something?
Sure. I believe if you look at the top of this photograph, let's see if I can get this going. One second. I can't quite get that going, but get the pointer. You see the row of 5 houses, what appears to be 5 houses, and at the end of that, actually, there's a small National Park Service reservation that meets a trail, and it's an informal trail. It's not a improved trail, and meets Sherrier Place, and that's a primary access to reach that trail. So that would be point B on this graphic. And then there's also from Chainbridge Road, which is marked as point A. The trail actually crosses Chainbridge Road, so you can access the trail from that point. And these are actually approximately about 150 feet away. It took me 1 minute to walk from where the proposed alley closing meets Chainbridge Road, which is towards the north, to walk to point B and access the trolley right away at that point.
Let me speak to that as well, if I may. There was conflicting testimony before the council about whether this alley was used as access to that trolley line, the trolley right-of-way. There was some testimony that there had been construction debris in there. The construction debris, if that's true, would have dated back to around 2008. And there was conflicting testimony whether it was used as access before then. Of course, before then, there were not the 4 houses that exist today. I've been out there myself several times, and if you go to page 6 of the EDR, you'll see a photograph that's somewhat like what's being displayed. It's not a very great distance down Chainbridge Road to the access point that I guess is A on what's being shown, and it's not a very great distance down Sherrier Place. And this is a very local, very local area. People who are using there would be a few people from the neighborhood who would access the trolley line here. There are many places along the length of the trolley line that people would access it. In other words, if you want to access the trolley line, you probably would not go to the corner of Chainbridge Road and Sherrier Place. Be the people who live in that immediate neighborhood who would be there. And it isn't a very far walk to either access point. But in any event, the testimony before the council was very conflicting with regard to whether people had in the past used this alley to access the right-of-way.
What is the National Park Service interest?
Generally speaking, what we see in green is close to the park service area, and the trolley line actually does cut through it, and we don't own that trolley line as it goes through the property toward Canal Road. So it's somewhat distant from the actual.
You have no adjacent interest?
It's not immediately adjacent to the alley, no.
Okay, thank you. Mr. May, did you have?
Yeah, I just want to say, as upsetting as it is as a resident to see something like this occur, to see somebody claiming public property for their own, I don't. That's not really the matter that's before us. The matter before us is there a federal interest that's affected, and is there a reason for us to disapprove it based on some adverse impact on a federal interest? This isn't even a question of whether the council acted properly, although I certainly appreciate understanding the case better as explained by Chairman Mendelson. It's very hard for me to see that there is any adverse impact on a federal interest. I know it's proximate to parkland, but this was an alley. It was a paper alley. but it was established as an alley, and it's not, the council's threshold is it needed for alley purposes anymore? And the answer was no. This very well could have been a paved alley from our perspective, and if something happened there and there was going to be runoff onto parkland or something like that, maybe there would be some adverse condition that we'd want to be prepared for. But that's not the case here, and I don't see any real potential for an adverse impact. And I mean, even if there was something that were to grow out of the homeowner's use of that property, those are all conditions that would have to be mitigated anyway, for building code purposes and for environmental code purposes and so on. I just don't see an impact on federal interest here. So I believe we have to support this recommendation.
Other comments or questions, or is there a motion?
I guess I just feel the need to make a statement looking at the EDR on page 5. Under analysis, paragraph 2, it talks about the federal elements of the comprehensive plan, including proposed alley closings within the district. The comprehensive plan within the parks and open space element does promote the provision and maintenance of public access to open space areas of particular interest or usefulness, with an emphasis on planning, completing, and maintaining connections between public parks and open space. Again, I appreciate what's being said here, and it's a value judgment on the, in my opinion, a value judgment on whether there's a federal interest. I think what's troubling is that we talk about maintaining connections. You are taking away a connection. I appreciate there's probably conflicting testimony about how that connection is used, but there's no data and there's no replacement. So based on that, I can't support the EDR, just on principle. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Without further comment, is there a motion on the EDR?
I'll move to approve the EDR.
The EDR has been moved and seconded. Hearing no additional comment, all in favor of the EDR say aye.
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 Opposed, no.
No.
One no, Ms. White.
Abstain.
One abstention, Mr. Dennis. Thank you. The second item on our agenda is item 4B. Four B is the master plan for the Pentagon Reservation, and Mr. Carlton Hart is with us.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The Washington Headquarters Services has submitted a draft master plan for the Pentagon Reservation. The Pentagon Reservation, as you are probably well aware, is located in Arlington County, Virginia. Before I get into the master plan itself, I'd like to give you a little bit of kind of background on the Pentagon Reservation itself. The Pentagon Reservation is 238 acres in size. The main Pentagon building is 6.5 million gross square feet. It was completed in 1943. And it has a 5-acre central courtyard. There are currently 23,000 employees that are assigned to the Pentagon, and the installation, the reservation, has 8,494 employee parking spaces. And I'll be talking about some areas in a few slides, but thought I'd kind of point them out here so you kind of get the relative idea of where these things are located on the reservation. On the north is the North Village and North Parking Lot. The North Village is just a support facility. The North Parking Lot is, as it says, a parking lot. There's also a south parking lot and a commuter plaza. The commuter plaza is where you've all heard of probably slugging and the slugs that are moving up and down 395. They come into the commuter plaza for letting the riders get out at that point and then be able to access the Pentagon Transit Center, also known as the PTC. The Pentagon Transit Center is a major regional transit hub that has both bus lines as well as metro rail. The Pentagon 9/11 Memorial, which is to the west of the Pentagon building, and the heating and refrigeration plant, which is the power plant, I guess, for and heating for the Pentagon reservation. I'll also note some parking lots that are south of 395 and south of the southern portion of the installation, and finally identify the area that is known as FOB 2, which is the Federal Office Building 2, also known as the Navy Annex. It was transferred to the Army and will become part of the Arlington National Cemetery in the future. So the last master plan to be adopted by the Commission was in 2005. That master plan is shown here, and it had two main objectives. The first objective was to complete the permanent security perimeter for the reservation, and the second was to implement enhanced sustainable strategies to promote long-term environmental health of the reservation and its surroundings. The major moves on in this master plan were the creation or introduction of parking garages. I've highlighted them here and circled them here on the image. These included these were done in an effort to help to convert some of the land around the Pentagon into open space. And as you'll note, the North Village and North parking lot were converted into green open space. Also the top level of the parking garages, which are 1, 2, 3, and then 4 and 5. Those top level of the parking garages would be used and made into green space as well with green roofs. The staff would like to note at this time just kind of an easy comparison between the two plans, and the major difference between them is that the Washington Headquarters Services, or WHS, is no longer proposing these parking garages, and instead looking to use the low impact development, or LID, to provide stormwater management. Because the parking garages are no longer being proposed, there were about 60 acres of additional open space with the green roofs and the conversion of the parking spaces. That would not be included in the 2014 master plan. There are 6 acres of open space that is being proposed, and I'll discuss that in an upcoming slide. But I wanted to note that that was the major change between the two plans. So the Commission did approve this 2005 master plan in a number of years ago, almost actually a little less than 10 years ago. The comments that the Commission made at that point are summarized here. The Commission did approve the master plan, but not the Transportation Management Plan, or TMP, because the TMP did not meet the 1 to 4 parking ratio that is required for this facility. The Commission required that DoD submit a revised TMP and show how it would meet the 1 to 4 parking ratio, or explain why it could not be met. Staff notes that that a new TMP has been submitted with this draft master plan, and that the 1 to 4 parking ratio is not met in the new TMP. There is a short explanation about why what a new proposed parking ratio is going to be, and I'll describe that in an upcoming slide. The Commission supported and commended DoD for reducing impervious surfaces in the 2005 plan by replacing surface parking with parking garages, and requested that the phased planning that the project to convert the north parking lot to open space be moved to an earlier phase. And again, there was a phase planning that was associated with that 2005 master plan. Unfortunately, as I noted in the previous slide, the WHS is no longer pursuing these parking garages. And they're not being pursued at this time because of cost and budget constraints. The Commission also requested that DoD update the signage plan to provide a uniform system that is clear and coherent. WHS has developed a Pentagon exterior standards manual that includes a uniform system for signage, and this plan was created by DoD in 2010. Staff is requesting that WHS update this manual because it references the 2005 master plan, which will become out of date with this update. And finally, the Commission reminded DoD in 2005 that the FOB2, or the Navy Annex, needed to be master planned. And as I noted a few minutes ago, that this land has been transferred to the Army and will be addressed in the Arlington National Cemetery Master Plan. That ANC Master Plan has been submitted to the Commission and will be reviewed at our April meeting. So next, we'll get to the existing conditions. For historic preservation, it is an important aspect of the Pentagon Reservation. The Pentagon itself, the construction began for it in 1941. The construction was completed in 1943. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1989, and then in 1992 listed as a National Historic Landmark. The areas in red, they just signify the significant aspects of the reservation, primarily being the five-sided shape of the building, the facades of the building, the central courtyard, as well as the mall and river terraces, which are landscaped area where there are areas that are directly adjacent to the building. Just to give you a little bit of kind of some views, long views. This is a view, and understanding that views of the Pentagon are important, and obstruction of these views is something that WHS seeks to minimize through the protection to protect the integrity of the historic resource. Here we have a view of the Pentagon. I know it's very hard to see. I'll give you a little highlight to show where it is. And this is the view from Arlington National Cemetery, so it's a view from the west. Looking at the building from the from the east, this is a view from the Humpback Bridge along George Washington Memorial Parkway, looking at the Pentagon River Terrace entrance, which is here. The Pentagon, just for some natural features and understanding these a little bit better, the Pentagon was constructed on fill material. You see the dark brown is actually the fill area, so quite a bit of fill was laid for it. This isn't there isn't a significant amount of vegetation on the installation, except in the areas that you see here, identified the kind of green areas shown throughout the site, as well as along the Pentagon Lagoon. There is a 100-year and 500-year floodplains that are identified on this. You really can't see the 100-year floodplains because they are adjacent to the Pentagon Lagoon. The 500-year floodplain is delineated by this black line that I'm outlining here, and it encompasses the north parking area as well as the north village. Yes. Sure. Sure. Which one? Sure. The 100-year line, if you see a dark purple down here, I'm down here. The dark purple is very close. It's within 100 feet of the Pentagon Lagoon. And so the only floodplain impact really is the 500-year floodplain, which is this kind of larger area to the north of the installation.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. As an important, as I noted earlier, a very important component to the reservation is the Pentagon Transit Center, also known as the PTC. The PTC is a major regional transit hub. There's some information about it here. The PTC has both metro rail access as well as multiple bus route access. It has a combined it has combined 8,850 peak hour passenger. So it's a lot of folks that are moving through here. There are 2 metro lines, the yellow and the blue line. In addition, there are 109 bus routes from 8 different service providers using 24 bus bays. The Pentagon notes that approximately 50% of the trips through the PTC are for non-Pentagon passengers. So there's a lot of folks that are coming here, they're kind of transferring, and they're going to different locations, locations outside of the Pentagon. For the kind of roadway network around the Pentagon reservation, I-395 is directly to the south of the reservation. To the west is Route 27, or Washington Boulevard. Cutting through the reservation is Route 110. That connects down into Crystal City. And then the far east is the George Washington Memorial Parkway, which is a National Park Service property. Some local roads as well, roads that are connecting north and south, as well as just connecting to Arlington, Joy Street, Hayes, Fern, and Eade Streets. And then there is another local road that actually crosses through the Pentagon Reservation, and that's the Boundary Channel Drive. It connects underneath 395 to a Arlington County park known as Long Bridge Park, which has been partially developed with recreation fields on the southern portion of it, and a aquatic center being planned for the northern portion of it. There are some nearby projects that are just wanted to note. There are transportation projects such as Columbia Pike and Army-Navy Drive improvements, improvements to local streets, as well as the interchange improvement, which would change the kind of cloverleaf to more of a diamond interchange at Boundary Channel Drive and 395. There's also the, has been, as you're probably well aware, the 14th Street Bridge work that's been ongoing for a number of years. I noted the Long Bridge Park, which you see here, this green element on the slide. And along 110, there is a project to do some sidewalk improvements and a trail, I guess, to connect to the to points to the north. And I also I've already mentioned the Arlington National Cemetery master plan that will be that has been submitted to the commission. Excuse me. Looking at existing parking, the Pentagon has identified 5 parking zones. You see them here. There's, of course, the north parking and south parking. There's a parking area that's very close proximity to the Pentagon building, a fleet vehicle parking area, and then a parking area for the heating and refrigeration plant. Also note the parking that's south of 395 located here. The parking ratio, as you see, is a 1 to 2.7, and that is the existing parking ratio. And we have about 8,500 spaces.
Before we move on, let me ask a quick question on parking. Going from 1 to 3 to 1 to 4, the 1,295 spaces, is that on the 1 to 3, or is that assuming the 1 to 4?
The 1,295 is actually less than. They haven't given us what the 1 to 4 is. We can calculate it, and I have calculated that. That's more like 2,700 parking spaces that they would need to go down from the existing 8,500. What they are doing is going down to almost 1,300 parking spaces, and that will get them to a 1 to 3.2. So they won't actually get to the 1 to 4 even with the reduction that they are proposing now.
Okay, I see.
Okay. So for the existing parking, another piece that WHS has noted is that the Pentagon does do some event staging, and these large parking lots are used for these events, such as Rolling Thunder, the Marine Corps Marathon, and the presidential inaugural parade setup as well. So there are some reasons for why the Pentagon is looking at kind of maintaining some of these large areas for those events. For existing, actually this is pedestrian and bicycle circulation, the Pentagon is looking at all of the, you see here the number of multi-use trails as well as pedestrian access points into the Pentagon. There are trails along 27 as well as along George Washington Memorial Parkway with the Mount Vernon Trail. There are some places where there are kind of connection issues. The connection to the Mount Vernon Trail, this is kind of an informal path that the Arlington County would like to connect underneath, along Boundary Channel Drive to their Long Bridge Park. And that's something that that is actually addressed in the plan. A connection along 27 to kind of realign this connection is also a piece of the puzzle. And then the connection, there is a park, Lady Bird Johnson Park, which is the along the eastern side of the Pentagon Lagoon. That's a National Park Service property. There is a current existing bridge, and making that connection between 27 and Boundary Channel Drive for the public is something that is that needs to be addressed as well. And this image is just showing the kind of poor pedestrian amenities and conditions that are that currently exist at the Pentagon. And again, that was one of the main points for the master plan update, is to improve pedestrian connections and make them safe, as well as doing some vehicular improving some vehicular conflicts as well. So for the draft master plan, similar to the 2005 master plan, the 2014 draft is intended to improve security, also enhance environmental sustainability on the reservation. It also includes another goal to enhance the quality of life for employees, and also address accommodations for visitors to the Pentagon and to other public facilities located on the reservation grounds, like the 9/11 Memorial. These are being proposed as well as in an effort to balance the various planning factors on the reservation, including funding, security, safety, public access, historic preservation, neighborliness, and sustainability. And here's the proposed draft master plan, a little bit larger so you can see it a little bit easier. And it does have some long-term and short-term projects that are listed on the right-hand side of the slide. There are 22 projects in all, and I've just identified 3 on this plan. These 3 have actually been approved by NCPC, and I just wanted to kind of point them out to you. These projects that you see, the 22 projects, are separated into a few topic areas. Some are security projects, some are environmental and sustainability projects, some are quality of life projects, and they do things like pedestrian and bike improvements, vehicular safety improvements, infrastructure and support improvements as well. In an effort to summarize the master plan, I've looked to combine the staff analysis with the master plan so that I'll provide some commentary on these elements as we move through. I've also discussed the previous commission action, which is, I did it fairly early in the presentation. The comprehensive plan compliance, this is really focused on the 1-to-4 parking ratio as well as environmental protection of sensitive areas. And I also talk about some specific areas, some specific projects in a little bit more detail as well. The next few slides will be kind of a comparison between what's existing and what's being proposed. So you have the side-by-side on the same slide. We have the existing land use plan here shown on the left. The major change really is the conversion of some of these construction laydown areas, these yellow areas, which are kind of around the Pentagon, and converting those into open space. The other change is really around the, I was talking about the commuter plaza a little earlier. There's a routing for buses and cars that has been proposed for the master plan that will make a fairly significant change in that location as well. For transit, I think I've kind of talked about the changes, and I'll show in an upcoming, the next slide, what the commuter plaza will look like, because that's really the main change, which is down in this location again. So this image just shows the change that's being proposed, and really the big change is currently the buses, as they move through, they come off of 395. They're on Eade Street, and then they when they move through this area, there's a conflict point here, as well as a conflict point with pedestrians needing to cross from the commuter plaza to the Pentagon Transit Center, or the PTC. And so the Pentagon WHS is looking to separate these two things out, and having the buses route around and then underneath to the PTC, and then cars would actually move through here and then into this area to drop off and pick up passengers, and then go back onto 395. There are quite a few pedestrian amenities as well, better crosswalks, more clearly delineated and defined trees and things that are and landscaping that's included as well. And there's, there is some LID that's proposed for the project, so that would be included in the plan. For the pedestrian and bicycle amenities, the major changes are the connections that I was noting before. There is now a connection between the Mount Vernon Trail and Boundary Channel Drive, a connection for the public across this bridge onto Lady Bird Johnson Park, and then a realigning of the connection along 27 for a multi-use trail that currently exists. The plan also includes better circulation for employees wanting to fitness train, because fitness is a big aspect of life at the Pentagon. And also for bicycles moving around the installation as well. We're looking at installing bike lanes and on-street bike facilities as well. Excuse me. The Virginia Department of Transportation provided comments on the master plan, noting, among other things, that a connection between this Lady Bird Johnson Park and Route 27 was something for pedestrians, is something that should be pursued. Also, the identification of the Pentagon Memorial Visitor Center, which is located here, and I'll discuss that in an upcoming slide. But connections and pedestrian connections to that, and also the siting of that was discussed in the comments from the Virginia Department of Transportation. The full comments from VDOT have been provided and are an appendix on your at the back of the EDR. The draft master plan is proposing an improvement to the parking ratio, and Chairman Bryant, your question was here. This is what they are looking to do. So the existing is 84.94. The proposed under the master plan in the 20-year is 71.99. So there is a reduction in the number of spaces. That reduction is basically, and I know you can't read the numbers that are here, but it's basically in the south parking lot, and this is because of some of the pedestrian amenities that are being proposed, as well as the reconfiguration of the commuter plaza. And there's a change in the Army Navy Drive parking lot, the one on the west side. The Army is proposing, WHS is proposing a tour bus drop-off for visitors to the 9/11 Memorial at the Pentagon at this location. There's an underground or tunnel that connects under 395, and the 9/11 Memorial is located in this vicinity. Excuse me. In neither of the master plan does WHS propose to meet the 1-to-4 parking ratio, and I wanted to make that clear. WHS's explanation for not meeting it is really that their idea is that they're thinking that they're more similar to other federal installations in the suburbs that are near transit, which would under the comp plan require a 1-to-3 parking ratio. In the comp plan, all of Arlington County is considered part of the historic District of Columbia boundary, so it's within the diamond. And all of those facilities have at least a 1-to-4 parking ratio. Some in the central area have the 1-to-5 parking ratio, and we dealt with that in the past few months with both the Joint Base Anacostia Bowling and the Washington Navy Yard master plans. Staff doesn't agree with this statement that it needs to 1-to-3 parking ratio because I've noted earlier that there is significant access to transit as well as a strong transportation infrastructure at and around the Pentagon, and that will accommodate alternative modes of transportation to commute there. And the reasons to provide, these reasons really provide a strong justification for the 1-to-4 parking ratio that is stipulated in the comp plan. The Washington Headquarters Services does provide information about their mode split. And staff understands that the Pentagon has already developed ways to promote alternative commuting and applaud them for doing a pretty good job so far. It does have one of the lower SOV, a single occupancy vehicle mode shares. And this chart on the bottom, the blue in the middle line is what the Pentagon provides now. The line that's directly to the left of it is what kind of general federal facilities provide, which is about 54% SOV, and then the region in the whole has an SOV of 72% or 73%. So they're pretty low as with respect to that, but the comp plan is looking for them to get to the 1-to-4 parking ratio, which would be a SOV, single occupancy vehicle mode split of 25%. And staff has just provided what that mode split might look like. So this is kind of a way of looking at the 25% and then what the other splits would be. Excuse me. WHS is also proposing to implement a number of different types of low-impact development measures around the reservation in an effort to reduce the stormwater impact on the Pentagon Lagoon and the Pentagon and the Potomac River. WHS notes that these measures will allow the Pentagon to conform with the applicable laws such as ESA and Executive Order 13514 and others. The master plan did not describe how these measures would be as effective as what was the master plan that was approved in 2005, however, and staff would ask that we understand the difference between the two master plans. There were nearly 60 acres of open space that was proposed in 2005. That's gone down to 6 acres conversion of additional open space, and staff would like to understand what that what that difference will mean in terms of stormwater protection or stormwater management. And for the next few slides, I'll be discussing the proposed projects around the reservation in a bit more detail. WHS has proposed a new control tower and fire station for the helipad located north of the Pentagon. While supportive of the project and its location, staff would recommend that WHS explore better pedestrian connection, and this is really, there's a kind of parking lot that's to the south of the helipad, and really making a better pedestrian connection in line with the other pedestrian improvements that are around the Pentagon, and do that for the final draft for the final master plan when it is submitted to us. The applicant has also proposed the Pentagon Security and Operations Center, also known as PSOC. This 26,000 square foot facility will be the home of the Pentagon Force Protection Agency. It will house a gun range, K-9 facility units, and other support facilities. Staff understands that the facility will be, as I noted earlier, will be constructed on the 500-year floodplain, and staff would like to understand if this facility can be sited to reduce its impact on the floodplain or be sited in a different location on the reservation to protect the sensitive floodplain area. And along with that, staff would also like to understand how WHS plans to protect sensitive areas on the reservation, particularly the 500-year floodplain. I spoke earlier about the 2005 master plan that had removed a lot of the impervious surface here, as well as the support facilities up here on the North Village and the North parking lot. And since these changes or conversions are no longer in the plan, staff is interested in understanding how these areas will be protected through the use of low impact development. And I'd like to note that we do really support the removal of the 1,300 spaces proposed in this draft plan and encourage the applicant to explore the removal of additional parking spaces with a focus on protecting environmentally sensitive areas in order to help WHS meet its 1-to-4 parking ratio goal. And so with the removal, if there could be additional removal of parking spaces, there's a way to do that in the north parking area. That's what that kind of boils down to. Excuse me. Finally, WHS is proposing a new entry plaza for a nicer pedestrian connection between the, and this plaza is located here where this 2 is, for a nicer entry into the 9/11 Memorial itself, and a nicer connection, a more pedestrian-friendly connection between the memorial and the parking area, which is the tour bus drop-off area, which is located here at number 4. This project is in addition, WHS has included a new Pentagon Memorial Visitors Education Center, which is this number 22 here. The project is intended as a support facility for the Pentagon 9/11 Memorial. However, staff is concerned about the visitor experience at this location, which seems to be somewhat out of the way from the memorial and the tour bus drop-off area. In addition, the interchange that is shown here is expected to be redesigned in the future because it's really not necessary to use in the currently. It is not clear, however, if this facility would be compatible with the changes that are happening at that site. WHS did not supply plans to staff for the new visitor center, and it's unknown if the building program requires things like bus parking or car parking, and how pedestrians would be accessing the site. And for that reason, we would like to work with the Washington Headquarters Services to see if we could find possibly an alternative location for this center that is more appropriate to an appropriate location that's either in closer proximity to the site, or the bus parking area, which is to the south here, to improve the visitor experience to the 9/11 Memorial. So co-locating what is being proposed here, down here possibly, is a possibility in the future, but we look forward to working with the Washington Headquarters Services to determine that. And with that, it's the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission support the draft 2014 Pentagon Reservation Master Plan goals of improving security, enhancing pedestrian amenities, reducing vehicular conflicts, and the enhancing of the environmental sustainability at the Pentagon Reservation, and notes that no parking structures are included in this draft master plan. Also notes that the 2005 master plan did not propose reduction in the number of vehicles, but did increase the amount of open space. The 2014 plan proposed a reduction in the parking spaces by almost 1,300 spaces and increased the open space by 6 acres. Also note that while the draft 2014 master plan proposed a reduction to reduce the employee parking, it does not reach the applicable comprehensive plan parking ratio goal of 1 space per 4 employees, and therefore requests that the applicant work with NCPC staff to identify locations for additional long-term opportunities to eliminate parking, preferably focused on locations that would increase open space within delineated floodplain areas north of the Pentagon Reservation and in proximity to the Potomac River and Pentagon Lagoon. And we provide the following comments on the draft 2014 master plan and request that the applicant address these comments prior to submitting the final master plan for commission review. For pedestrian circulation, request that the applicant incorporate amenities such as landscaping and sidewalks between the helipad and the Pentagon to provide safer pedestrian connections. For stormwater, request information demonstrating how the proposal to provide low-impact development at the reservation will be as effective in mitigating stormwater runoff as the green roofs and additional open space that was proposed in the 2005 plan. For transportation, request responses to the comments submitted by the Virginia Department of Transportation regarding pedestrian trail connections around the reservation and pedestrian and vehicular access to the proposed Memorial Visitors Education Center. Regarding the Pentagon Reservation Exterior Standards Manual, request an update to the Pentagon Reservation Exterior Standards Manual to be developed in, that was developed in 2010 to be consistent with the 2014 master plan. And, excuse me, finally, request that the applicant to provide analysis and documentation describing the proposed siting of the Pentagon Security Operations Center building within the 500-year floodplain rather than another location on the Pentagon Reservation. And the last recommendation is to request that the applicant work with staff on identifying and analyzing alternative sites for the Pentagon Memorial Visitors Education Center to find a more appropriate location that is closer proximity to the memorial or co-located with a proposed tour bus drop-off area along Army-Navy Drive in an effort to improve the visitor experience and do that prior to submitting the final master plan for commission review. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. As noted, this is in draft form, and the question before us is to approve the comments back to Washington Headquarters Service in preparation for their resubmitting or submitting to us the final in a few months. Ms. Wright, please.
As a matter of policy on calculating the parking ratios, so I'm assuming that parking ratios are based on a 1-to-1 employee to desk. You know where I'm going, ready? Ratio. So how do you calculate a parking ratio when you have, let's say, a 2-to-1 desk ratio? So you have, instead of, not here, just making it up. So you've got 100 people in a master plan from 10 years ago.
You have 200.
But today you have 200 people, and how do you figure out the parking ratio based on a different utilization rate of the actual building?
I mean, right now, I think that would probably be a better parking ratio if they had more people that were coming to the
right. Well, that's
so
why I'm asking, and we need to think about this moving forward. And I don't know the answer.
Yeah, and I think it's a question that's still that is still out there to try to figure out how to do that. And it is kind of a moving target right now because I think that folks, we're hearing the news that there are some issues about even doing some kind of the open office
right.
concerns and things. So I think that right now we have a parking ratio that's based on a unit or a parking space per person, and that's what we have to go with for right now.
So that's based on number of employees assigned to a building.
Yes. Yes, and the Pentagon is probably one of the more difficult places to do that because people can be assigned to the Pentagon, but they could
right.
work at a number of places that are in the region, or they may be doing it at a they may not be doing it. They may be doing at the Pentagon for 6 months at a time. So they may be here for 6 months
right.
and then go to a different location.
But as people, I just wanted to ask the question and ask us all to think about this because it's going to become more and more of an issue, and we need to. We've had some of this already, not for reasons of parking ratios, but for lots of other reasons. And we, at some point, we need to discuss it as a commission in terms of how those calculations are going to be made. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. May?
Yeah, I have a few comments. The National Park Service National Capital Region is responsible for review of NHL projects from a National Historic Landmark perspective. And I just had a couple observations from our staff review on that. First is that the NHL actually does comprise more than the Pentagon and the terrorists and so on. And there's a description that we have that's the official description from the NHL, and it comprises 41 acres, so it's essentially the bulk of the campus.
I'm sorry, it's how many acres?
41 acres.
That's the structure.
That's the structure itself.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
The
maybe
structure
it's a misunderstanding on our staff.
That's 200 something.
Yes, 200 acres or so.
Okay. All right. So, and then the other comment I got from them was that the statement that at this point the projects within the master plan will be of negligible or potentially beneficial impacts to historic resources. It seems early to have reached that conclusion, but we do note that there's at least in the report, you're calling for a PA for continuing consultation, and so that's how that will be addressed.
Yes.
The second thing is and this is separate from the NHL discussions, identification of the new trail, or rather that connection, the famous trail to nowhere, as a the fact that connection is good. I think we would suggest that perhaps it be considered as an employee fitness route, because right now the single employee fitness route that's identified in the plan does get substantial use by Pentagon employees, and there are some impacts associated with that. And we see some benefit to the idea that there might be more than one, and so there might be an opportunity to spread the fitness opportunities, if you will, for the employees at the campus. And then the last thing is that there were numerous other smaller trail connection issues that were raised by the staff at George Washington Memorial Parkway, and I would just urge that the planners work closely with the staff at George Washington Memorial Parkway to make sure that all of that is that those concerns are addressed, because I think they have some good suggestions for it.
Thank you. And we do have folks from NWHS from DoD here to answer.
Yeah, I like to take advantage of the captive audience to make comments like this. I appreciate it.
Further comments before we vote? Mr. Rhodes.
Mr. Chairman, I would just share a couple observations, and as was mentioned, we have the smart folks here who are taking down all the comments and taking them into consideration. As we work to come back with further information on the requests of the staff and the Planning Commission, I would just submit, pardon my oversimplification, but the 2005 plan was a nice idea. It wasn't tremendously. It was not fiscally constrained. So building 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 parking spaces in parking garages and some construct were a great idea, and it would have provided a lot of green space. But I think what we've done here is attempted to take into consideration some other practical realities, not just financial, but also the transportation network and the transportation hub. It is a critical area. One thing going a little askew in South Parking affects the whole region in the transportation realities. It also tried to take into consideration some other operational dynamics. So we will look to try and address the greatest degree and be as responsive as possible to the comments that are presented here. I don't know that we can. The other thing we attempted to do here was to try and make a significant stride towards some of the parking goals with the 1,300 spaces, and that's what we felt was viable and possible. We'll certainly look to work with staff to see what else might be a possibility. The one other dynamic I would just highlight is that the Pentagon Memorial Visitor Center is not a project we would be constructing. That is something the Pentagon Memorial Fund, the families, that they would be constructing, and they've been working with VDOT, they've been working with the state on the interchange and the preliminary plans for the modification of that interchange to see how it would be able to be configured. They have some strong feelings about the proximity to the memorial, to the flight line associated with how the tragedy occurred, the ability to have proximity and view to the Pentagon. So there's other dynamics. It's not really just inside staff planning dynamic, and we'll work to try and help share that and incorporate that so we can figure out what the best approach is. But thank you for the review and the opportunity to work further on it. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. The question before us is approval of comments on the draft master plan. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Hearing no further discussion, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We have one more item on our agenda. It's agenda item number 5A. It's an information presentation on the site improvements and the perimeter security of the Department of State Harry S. Truman Building. Mr. Weil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, okay, and it should be, this is the correct description from that, but I'll send this on to you. Thank you very much. My name is Mike Weil. I'm the project officer here at NCPC, who has been involved in the Harry S. Truman Building physical perimeter security design. We have David Grossweiler here, who is a civil engineer and project manager for the State Department, who has actually been leading this project over the last couple of years. It's been a while since NCPC has actually reviewed this project. NCPC reviewed this for a concept back in 2004, and 10 years later, I know David and the State Department have been working through some issues with the district and other federal stakeholders to further develop this design. So David, I'm going to call David up here in a minute, and he's here to provide an overview to the Commission related to the current design scheme. And this presentation really is intended to provide an overview for the Commission and the public in advance of a preliminary design submission in May or June later this year in a few months. So with that, I'll call David Grossweiler to give the presentation.
Good afternoon. My name again is David Grossweiler. I'm with the U.S. Department of State, and I have the pleasure of providing some information on the background of our project and where we currently are, and hopefully what further information you'll see in the very near future. As Michael described, it's been a while since you've actually seen any of the background information of the project. There was a concept submission that had been presented back in December 2004. And one of the things that I'm going to try to show today is how that concept has changed from 2004 to today, and how we got to where we are through consultation with review agencies, with the neighbors, with the district. Other timeline activities that have taken place is we've made multiple submissions to the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts, one in 2004, one in 2010, one about 6 weeks ago to renew our concept plan approval with the Commission of Fine Arts and to solicit their feedback as to the changes that we're proposing. This previous summer, we also made a submission to DDOT's Public Space Committee. I think it's a little uncommon to make a concept submission on something like this, but we wanted to make sure that what we were proposing in the public space was recognized and you could use their feedback to incorporate into the future plans of what we're trying to accomplish. Three things have really changed since the last concept plan submission in 2004. We've moved our truck inspection facility that's on 21st Street, and you'll see some pictures of that here shortly, from a much more heavily traveled road to D Street, which hopefully makes it a little bit less visible, less functional for us in terms of a programming perspective, but we think it's a better treatment for the district street. We've relocated the bollard line further away from the curb. That doesn't necessarily mean the bollard line has changed. It's a combination of two functions. One, us in some locations moving it closer to the building. In some locations, it's the district's preference to move the curb to maybe a more beneficial location to increase the distance between the curb and the barrier system. And then the third major item is our inclusion of low-impact design features that you've seen discussed today. Even we didn't have any of these elements included in our 2004 concept. We've looked for opportunities to include it almost everywhere, and we think we have quite a few locations where we'll be able to treat stormwater runoff from street, not from building property. So the people that we've really been coordinating with on the district side has been the Department of Transportation, the Office of Planning, State Historic Preservation Officer, and then a couple of the other district agencies, but the Office of Planning, DDOT, and Chapeau have been really the main three players that have been involved in the process for the past 10 years. Listing under the federal agencies, it's really been a conglomeration of neighbors, review agencies, interested stakeholders. The National Park Service is actually, as part of this, willing to allow us to use a portion of Reservation 104 for the truck inspection station. So they've been a major player in the consultation that's been ongoing. Some of the ones that haven't been listed are the community agencies. American Pharmacists Association as a neighbor has been actively involved. Foggy Bottom Association. But it's been a pretty healthy consultating group. To define the project area, our Harry S. Truman Building is bounded by 21st and 23rd Streets Northwest, by C and D Streets. It does have linkages to the East Street Expressway, as that off-ramp links to what is remaining of D Street. Virginia Avenue has a small linkage up at the northeast corner adjacency. And then in this chart, we've also shown 22nd Street, because as we've made suggestions to close the C and 22nd Street intersection, it does impact how vehicular traffic will circulate on 22nd Street between C and Constitution Avenue. In the 2004 concept, I think we had 7 phases, and some of those phases had multiple parts, so it starts getting confusing as to how many increments we were trying to break up the project. That added significant confusion as to what we were trying to accomplish. I think what we're proposing today is a much more direct and complete and a separation of work. So what's shown in the orange is basically all the streetscape and everything that we're including as phase 1. Work in the public space, a security pavilion at the D Street entrance, vehicular inspection stations at the intersections of 21st and C, 23rd and C, 23rd and D Street. One of the things that was previously in a phase but is currently under construction is the U.S. Diplomacy Center, which is at the entrance to the old war portion of the building, which is in the northeast quadrant. And then the 3 remaining items in blue are security pavilions that we've designated as phase 2 work. So we're trying to show as best as possible what our intentions are, but we haven't started a design process to actually put some of those concepts to paper. It's our intention that everything that we're trying to complete with the D Street Pavilion would be representative of the other entrance pavilions. And I think the only thing that we have some concerns about is the C Street entrance and its ceremonial functions, that what we have currently programmed for D Street is still appropriate for C Street, but that would be part of a later consultation. It's kind of difficult to see a lot from the site plan other than what level of vegetation that we're proposing to try to incorporate onto the district streets, and then also possibly the lane locations and the direction of traffic. It's not our proposal to change any lane quantities or travels of lane. It basically maintains them. It may reorient some of the roads to line up with the historical center line. But we think in terms of what we're trying to propose, and you'll see in some of the later slides as we go by street, that what we've shown is a typical DC street as best as possible on 23rd, on 21st, and also C Street. And then as compared to the site plan shown previously, there's a blue line that's been added to this, to the site plan. That's to identify where the vehicle barriers are at. So our objective from the State Department's security needs is a vehicular restriction. It's not pedestrians or bicycles. So as we've developed our concept, one of the goals that we've tried to have is to make sure that pedestrians, bicycles have free access through and around the property. And if anything, where we can, we've tried to make changes that actually would improve that experience. And I'll try to point out some of those in a little bit. Regarding low-impact development, we have 3 opportunities that we're trying to identify. A bioretention area that would be an open swale, vegetated swale. We have a couple locations on D Street where it's green space, and we think we can try to incorporate that technology. We have some blue areas specifically on 21st and 23rd, and then also C Street, that we're calling those bioretention tree planters. I think it's something that you've seen routinely now within the district, where street runoff through the gutter pan is diverted into a tree box, and then the rate of discharge is slowed. And then the third item that we're trying to incorporate is a structured fill material, a silva cell, under sidewalks so that it can support tree growth. Our next slides try to show these changes street by street. What's shown at the top is the 2004 design plan that was presented to NCPC. What's in the middle is the 2014 design that was presented at Commission of Fine Arts back in November. And then at the bottom, you'll see an elevation of the current design. I hope you can see it in the middle section where there's some section marks, so that the slides that come later on, immediately after this regarding 21st Street, you can see where we've taken sections through the plan or also tried to show renderings at certain locations. So 21st Street, we think, is significantly improved from what was shown 10 years ago. The major feature is the truck inspection station. It currently is directly opposite of the entrance to Old War. What we're proposing is to relocate it to the intersection of Virginia and D Street. What it'll do by the relocation is it'll allow us the opportunity to take the eastern side of 21st Street, replant it, and try to mimic as much as possible the street tree features that take place on the western side of 21st Street adjacent to the Harry S. Truman Building. We are trying to be aware of that there are some National Park Service interests across the street. There's a discus thrower monument that was presented to the United States from the government of Italy following World War II, and we're trying to make sure that those views to Old War and to the Diplomacy Center are still maintained. This is our first cross section. It's technically through roughly the center of the U.S. Diplomacy Center. You can see the flag pole that's somewhat shaded on the left as a reference point. What you can see on the left side of on the eastern side of the street, in front of the National Park Service Park and adjacent to the Federal Reserve buildings, is that the existing sidewalk that is anywhere between 4 and 6 feet. It's our intention to widen it to 10 feet. It's our intention to make the tree planter bed 6'4", something to that effect, so that the trees that are either planted or that are existing and intended to remain have a viable chance to grow. We've agreed with the district on a quantity of lanes that match what's existing, that they still stay southbound in orientation. And then directly in front of the Diplomacy Center, we've proposed a 6-foot tree planter bed, some public benching for people to sit and rest, a sidewalk of 10 foot in width, and then you can see the remainder dimension to the face of the Diplomacy Center. There's an additional elevation on 21st Street a little bit further south, but just north of what we're calling the Joggers entrance, which is the southern entrance on 21st Street. Again, it shows the tree planting area, how much LID that we're trying to accomplish in locations like this, a 10-foot sidewalk for pedestrian and bike access, and then a remaining planting area for vegetation. And then this perspective shows those concepts in a three-dimensional reference. So it is, we do think it improves the circulation as compared to what's currently there. We do think it provides LID opportunities that presently don't exist. And the final rendering on 21st Street is, this would be looking south from the Virginia and 21st Street intersection towards the mall. The next street that I'd like to go to is C Street. Back in 2004, we had a divided lane with a median. We had a rosette type feature in front of the C Street entrance. I think the response that we had received in the past 10 years was that it wasn't typical of a DC street. So we've made some changes to revise that and make it more typical in case for some reason the perimeter security was no longer ever needed. One of the other things that we've changed is that there was a previous ellipse towards the southeast corner of the Harry S. Truman Building, and you can see in the middle section that that portion is now being reclaimed and vegetated. And then I do have one cross-section, the next slide, through the vehicle inspection station that's at the intersection of 23rd and C. It shows still 10-foot sidewalks on both sides of the street, and the process of the vehicles in terms of being inspected inbound and then outbound. We consulted quite extensively on 23rd Street as well. The original concept had all the barrier systems 2 feet from the curb on the sidewalk side of the street. What you'll see in the upcoming elevations or cross sections is that the barrier line is now separated either at generally 6 feet or 10 feet. So one of the things that we've agreed to with the district is where we can add space to the location between the curb and the barrier that we have. We've incorporated that into the design. One of the things that the district has done is they've made a decision that rather than maintain the existing location of the curb where it is, that it would be more logical to align the curb on 23rd Street in front of Harry S. Truman with the curb as it exists in front of the American Pharmacists Association. So as you travel north on Constitution, you won't see the current lane, or I'm sorry, the road width change that takes place. It presently is 56 feet between USIP and AFA. It jumps to 66 feet over the East Street Expressway and then compresses back to 56 feet as you approach George Washington University. What this will do is it'll align the road, at least on the eastern side in front of HST, and that road alignment or the curb alignment will permit more distance between the curb and the barrier systems that we're proposing on 23rd Street. We've tried to maintain as much vegetation as possible on 23rd Street. I think the only gap in the tree line that we have is in front of the 23rd Street entrance, where there's quite a few functions that take place in the Dean Acheson Auditorium. And then this is a cross-section on 23rd Street. It shows a wall and bench that we're trying to include. As I had mentioned earlier, in this location, the distance between the curb and the barrier system is close to 7 feet. It does include an LID planning area that we've tried to maximize in terms of size, and then a 10-foot sidewalk for pedestrians and bicycles. The existing sidewalk's either 8 or 9 feet, so this is one of the locations that we believe by making the sidewalks more per the district standard, we would have improved the pedestrian experience. Difficult to see.
I'm working very hard. Bench. Is it the little black? Ooh, sorry. Is it behind the guy with the shoulder strap to the right? That little bump.
Yeah, that's correct. He's got a white shirt on.
Yeah.
He's standing. Looks like he got tired and started to walk away.
Okay, so.
Not a very comfortable bench.
Yeah. So. And then, David, the wall that you're referring to, I'm assuming, is to the right of the 5'3" demarcation point. You give a dimension to the very right before the moat of sorts.
Correct. So that is a building moat of sorts that,
Yeah.
that surrounds HST. The 5'3" is a dimension from where the moat stops to where we're going to be able to place this bench.
So what I'm asking is when you refer to wall and bench, is the wall actually that part of the moat? I'm having trouble with it in section.
I guess I may have on the next slide a better example of wall and bench. So the barrier systems are meant to restrict vehicular movement, not pedestrian movement. And so what we've been using, the barrier system is meant to be our description of bollards, of walls, of rails that are meant to control where pedestrians try to cross the street, and then also some locations where they are actually walls that have a multi-purpose. And so on the next slide, you can, I went the wrong way. On the next slide, you can see the person actually sitting on the bench. And so in this location, we're proposing to actually use a wall that internally to it is a bollard as a vehicle restraining device, but then serves the dual purpose of somebody being able to use it as the back of a bench when they're resting. So it's not meaning to confuse, but there is a range of treatments that we're using to provide the vehicular restrictions without impacting pedestrians as much as possible, but then also giving opportunities so that they can serve more than one purpose.
So do you have a plan detail that sort of codifies, you know, the where you're using which form?
Yes. I don't have that as part of my presentation. So one of the things that we went through as part of the consultation was the percentage mix of bollard, wall,
right,
and then fence. And so the district was fairly clear that they wanted to minimize the use of walls, and they wanted it to be as open as possible. And so we might have started at a 40-30-30 mix, and it's gotten significantly less, where the wall treatment may at this point be 15%. The rail treatment is also a little bit less, with the purpose of the rails being to make sure that people don't fall into the LID that's being planned, or so that they're not crossing at locations where
you don't want them to.
Yeah, on 23rd Street where people are going 40 miles an hour.
Are you going to, as part of your presentation, though, you're going to include that next time, right?
Correct. That would be part of our preliminary presentation.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And then just not to skip over this cross-section, but it is trying to show the bench built into the wall, and then also how it interacts with the Dean Acheson entrance on 23rd Street. And then finally on 23rd Street, a perspective of how the rail system jumps from, you know, nominally 6 feet to nominally 10 feet, so that it's not linear up and down 23rd Street. How the breaks through the rail system, the barrier system, allow for taxi drop-offs or whatever transaction that takes place. The district was fairly specific as to what the spacing of the breaks in the barrier system had to be. But then also how much space and how much LID opportunity that we have between the curb and the barrier system that is drastically different than our previous submission in 2004, which was 2 feet. It would have been completely hardscape between the curb and the barrier. We're now the only locations where it's fully hard is at the cuts that the district wanted to make sure that people could get through the barrier system at some regular interval, nominally 35 feet. The next comparison is D Street. I also think this is probably pretty significant, but specifically as it relates to the truck inspection station. The right-hand portion of the work is essentially the same. There's still a vehicular inspection station at the entrance of the D and the 23rd Street intersection. It's the State Department's intention to have shuttle buses that route through the city, drop off people here. And so what you'll see in the middle iteration is we've changed the connection between the East Street Expressway so that a truck or a vehicle coming off the East Street Expressway will need to merge with our shuttle bus traffic that comes off of the restricted D Street, and then either make a connection to Virginia Avenue, or if it's a truck, they would come into our inspection station that's just to the left of these two little trees that are kind of bumping out there. I don't have a good way of pointing them out. What's drastically different for us in the truck inspection station is that our queue on 21st Street is essentially about 12 vehicles, depending upon the length. What we're looking at here is really no more than 3. So one of the things that we're going to have to do on our end is come up with a much better way of scheduling and controlling trucks. In the event that the truck inspection station is full, we do have a plan, we do have a map that shows how a truck would make a return leg to the inspection station. It's at best 1.5 miles. It's on another alternative, it's 2 miles, so that on our end, in terms of being good schedulers of our loading dock capacity, we're going to have to make sure that the truck inspection station is managed properly. The deliveries to the Harry S. Truman Building are through an underground loading dock. They're in excess of 50 trucks a day, and that's really the need for us to be able to inspect trucks prior to letting them enter under the building. We did speak with other agencies within the district as to how they inspect vehicles. There's not a one that lets a building inspected or uninspected under without direct visual observation from the inspection point all the way to the facility. And then a couple examples or a couple cross sections at D Street. This first one is what we're calling the Pocket Park, which is at the intersection of D and 23rd Street. I think I should go back to the previous slide. It's all the way to the left, I'm sorry, all the way to the right of the design. It's fairly large, if you want to call it that, greater than 10 foot in terms of hardscape, but it's our intention to use it as a place where people can gather, could eat lunch, could sit down. It is heavily trafficked as people come down from the Foggy Bottom Metro to Constitution Avenue. But it does seem like a good place where they would be able to at least break midstream prior to getting to Constitution. And then the other cross-section that we have is at the truck inspection station closer to Virginia Avenue and 21st Street. And then this next visualization is of the Pocket Park that I was trying to describe at D and 23rd Street's intersection. The last perspective that I have is of the D Street Security Pavilion. So this is something that we consulted with Commission of Fine Arts on several occasions. The roof line was changed in response to their comments in the end of 2010. And this is the perspective and plans that they've seen in November 2014. Just to give you an update of our schedule, as Michael had said, it's our intention to try to be back here with a preliminary review, much more detailed in May or June of this year. We're trying to finalize a draft EA to put out to public comment again. We think we're at the point where we've gone through consultations enough and we have a design which works to meet our security objectives. It reflects the consultations that we've received from the district agencies, from the federal review agencies as well. And I guess I would try to just use some of the language that Commission of Fine Arts had given, in that they endorsed our proposal as well integrated and seemingly effort response to a highly complex problem. So their comment was appreciated. I think we've gone through a lot of work to try to make sure that what we were proposing met our need, but still could be of benefit to the pedestrians, bicyclists, to the district residents and visitors, and that our timeline kind of reflects that we were willing to work towards a project which met as many goals as possible, that we weren't just trying to take the first solution and implement it. So we think at this point our concept is good, and as far as we can tell, it's been supported by Public Space Committee and Commission of Fine Arts within the past 6 months. And so then this is my last prepared slide.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments on this information presentation?
I have one question, and I may have missed it because I wasn't paying attention. Are you cutting into the curb for stormwater management at all? I mean, into the actual curb?
We have solutions that would divert water that's in the gutter pan into the tree box. Those haven't been finalized yet with the district. Is that what you mean in terms of cuts to the curb?
Well, I mean, I'm just asking. I know we had a lot of back and forth on Commerce on this subject about cutting into the curb, so there was stormwater could then be collected that way, and I didn't notice it, but I couldn't see because of the detail.
And we didn't provide that level of detail. We've talked about it, but haven't finalized the design really for one issue. The slope of 23rd Street is much more significant than C and 21st.
Yeah.
And so in the other solutions that we've seen around the district, Some have actually included water diverters to push water into the tree boxes, and they tend then to be little asphalt blobs that are stuck into the gutter pan after the fact. So we think there might be better opportunities on C or on 21st where the slope is less to naturally collect the water because it doesn't have the same velocity that it might have on 23rd Street.
And my other question was, do you have some, how many seating, I was going to say seating arrangements, but it's not like a formal living room. How many benches do you have in the whole design? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I could provide that.
Because I'll probably grill you on that when you come back on what kind of amenities you're including and being able to quantify that and those kinds of things.
Okay, it may be difficult to see here, but one of the things that we had initially started out was a lot more wall sections.
Yeah.
And that wall section lent itself to being also a bench location.
Right.
And one of the things that we heard from the district staff was that the use of walls tend to create a much more harsh or less visually appealing barrier system. And so our percentages of walls drastically dropped through the consultation process purely to respond to their comments. Because at the end, the barrier system will work from a vehicular.
Right, so I would rethink that. With all due respect to the district, I would rethink that. There's more than one way to skin a cat in terms of creating those. If you have the bollards that are encased in, I don't know what your finishes are or anything, but there's a way to create the seating that by punctuating the seat back, and you still get the security.
Correct. And very difficult to see on this elevation at the bottom, but where, for example, on 23rd Street, the remaining wall sections are, they basically flank the entrance on 23rd Street, and then they flank the intersections with C and D Street. So we had, I think at one point might have had 9 individual wall elements, and I think we're down to 5. And the wall, it was difficult, other than on the building yard side of the sidewalk, to include a bench. Which you did see, you picked up in that one elevation. So on the building yard, there's still benches. Our wall opportunities are less than there were, but we can definitely provide a lineal foot quantity of how many benches that we're trying to incorporate on all.
No, I just would want to know how many and that kind, you know.
The comments, other heads-up suggestions of what you want to see addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's the last item on our agenda. Is there anything else to come before us from commission members? Hearing none. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.